I got the most exciting opportunity. I was able to get early access of Wuchang Fallen Feathers. This is a game that a lot of you have asked me about. It's a game that I've talked a lot about, so I'm so appreciative for this early opportunity. And I got a chance now to share my experience with you all and either help you all on your way to success as you make your way through the game, or help you decide whether or not the game is for you. I'll be showing some clips of my playthrough. It's all about within the first 10 hours of the game, just to give you some insights and tips and whatnot. But if you don't want to see any spoilers whatsoever, I just want to give you a heads up that I will be showing certain boss fights, certain locations, etc., all from about within the first 10 hours. Additionally, this video will not be a full review of the game. That's for two reasons. One, I wanted this video to be spoiler free so you could watch it and be safe and either like set you up for success for your playthrough, like I said, or help you decide whether or not this game is for you. And two, probably, of course, more importantly, I've not yet finished the game. So it makes no sense for me to make critiques or commentary on the story when I've not yet seen the conclusion. Of course, now, before we get into it, I want to say the biggest thank you to 505 Games, to Leenzee, and to Bilibili for the opportunity to have an early access copy of the game so I could share this experience with you all. So massive, massive thank you to them all. Now, let's get into it. Let's start off with some basic information about Wuchang. I assumed if you clicked this video, you have some idea what the game is about already, but if you don't, Wuchang Fallen Feathers is an upcoming Souls-like action role-playing game developed by Leenzee and published by 505 Games. The player assumes the role of Bai Wuchang, a female pirate embarking on a journey through a war-torn and plague-stricken lands of Shu during the late Ming dynasty. For those of us that know nothing about the Ming dynasty, this is a period of Chinese history from the late 1300s to about the mid-1600s. That was a key period in Chinese history for the unification of China. It's known for its economic prosperity, a boom in culture as we see advancements in art, literature, architecture, and porcelain production, key administrative reforms, and an expansion in maritime expeditions. Key Chinese landmarks that we're all familiar with that would have been built during this period would have been the Great Wall of China and the Forbidden City, which I actually got to visit in May, and I may actually be visiting right now at the time that this video is published, so that's kind of cool. Whilst the Ming dynasty was a period of great prosperity, it was also a period of great strife. Internal struggles, corruption, famine, and weak leadership all led to its destruction and eventual downfall. Wuchang Fallen Feathers is set during the late Ming dynasty, when we're already deep in decline and strife and unrest are at an all-time high. Will you need to be an expert on the Ming dynasty to be able to enjoy Wuchang Fallen Feathers? Absolutely not. I absolutely am not an expert. I've been playing it, spoiler alert, I'm really enjoying it. We're going to get into more details later, don't worry. However, one of the things I think does uniquely set Wuchang apart from its other counterparts is that it is rooted in real life history. Throughout the game, we will have an opportunity to meet and hear about real life historical figures and explore real life places, all through the fantastical lens of the world of Wuchang. Speaking of fantastical, our fictional world is plagued by a feathering disease. A disease that causes the world's inhabitants to sprout feathers on their body until it eventually consumes their entire being and humanity. It is a disease seemingly without a cure. As Wuchang, we will be exploring this disease-afflicted world and encountering many humans and demons, all out to kill you as a result of our infection of the feathering. It's this incredibly interesting hybrid of fantastical and real life that I think really sets Wuchang apart from its counterparts. There are a handful of other things I think set Wuchang apart from its counterparts, all of which I will be getting into later on in the video, so don't worry, stick around, all of that good stuff. So we know the basic information about the game already. Now let's get into the story. Again, this is completely spoiler free. I'm only going to be revealing information that you learn within the first 10 hours of the game. This again should just help you kind of orientate your thinking so that you know what to expect as you make your way through the game. Let's talk more about the feathering. When you launch into the game, you wake up in a cave, completely alone and now with feathers sprouts from your upper left arm. You enter a dreamlike state and are given a weapon from a mysterious veiled woman. Remember this? We'll come back to it. And are then sent on your way in the world. You quickly stumble upon the Reverent Temple, one of the key areas of the game and a de facto home base, and meet Swan Yangzi. I am really sorry. I am actually learning Chinese. 我自中文. I think I'm getting my pronunciation better. There is a chance that I will be mispronouncing names. If I do that, I'm so sorry, it's not intentional, okay? He tells you that he is the one that helped you recuperate, that you've lost your memory as a result of the infection, and that this disease is spread by a mysterious man-eating demon who attacked your home base, where ships rise 6 moons prior to the start of the game. A moon cycle is 30 days, so this would have happened about 6 months ago. You have the opportunity to speak with many others in the temple, all of who have been infected with the disease, all at various stages of transformation, and then you have the opportunity to start a couple of side quest storylines. I actually think this is a really effective way to start the game. At first, it can seem like, and to be fair, you don't have to talk to any of these people. I chose to talk to all of these people. I think it's a great time to caveat. and you'll hear me say it a couple times throughout this video, I typically play games very slowly. That's because I enjoy exploring around. I want to be doing all of the side quests. I want to be talking to the NPCs. I really take my time exploring. So it does take me longer to play through things than other people do. And so I did take the time to speak to all of the people. So on the one hand, at the start of the game, it kind of could feel a bit weird where it's a bit of a slower start if you do choose to speak to all these people. But I think it's really effective because it gives the player a very clear sense of the scope and scale that we're dealing with. And also it gives you a chance to see kind of what happens to people as you progress further and further with the feathering disease. So already at this beginning, it sets the stakes quite high. This is really bad. I don't know if you needed someone to punctuate it's bad. I think you can kind of understand that this is not a desirable situation, but I do think it's really effective and really important. All NPCs direct you to Shu Sanctum, a much larger and key home base for the game, akin to like the Round Table Hold in Elden Ring, Firelink Shrine in Dark Souls, Hotel Krat in Lies of P. Unlike all of those games though, our key NPCs will be traveling between key locations like the Reverend Temple, like Shu Sanctum, all progressing with you as you progress through the story. So you won't just see one NPC stay at one location. There may be some obviously that stay at one location, but at least in my 10 hours of playthrough, I've seen them sort of flit between the two, which I think is really interesting. As you make your way through Worship's Rise, our starting world, you collect clues that help you piece together why you're here, why you're infected, and what your goal is. Although we know our protagonist is Wuchang, we learn at around the 7-hour mark of my playthrough. Again, just keep in mind, I'm playing the game much slower than I think potentially a majority of people are going to be playing through the game, that her real name is Bai Wuchang, and she has a younger sister, Bai Yu. Bai Wuchang joins a pirate crew and, because of her skill with the blade, has earned the nickname Bai Wuchang from her crewmates. Bai Yu, Wuchang's sister, fell in battle. The details at the time in my playthrough still unknown, and Bai Wuchang, who I will continue to call Wuchang, sets off to her homeland to find a way to bring her sister back from the dead. Wuchang's last correspondence with her crew suggests that she found a way to resurrect her sister. So early on in our playthrough, we have our clear yearning. Yearning is a term used in any piece of narrative media, so books, television, film, and video games, of course, that describes the motivation that pulls our protagonist through the story. It's the goal that our protagonist needs to achieve. It can change as the story progresses, but great narratives typically have like a very simple and very powerful narrative for viewers, or in this case, players, to understand and for us to follow along with. It's the reason why we stay invested. A really great example of this in terms of video gaming, and don't worry, there's no spoilers. This is something that you find out right at the beginning of God of War 2018. As you start the game, Kratos, your yearning at that time is to deliver your wife's ashes to the top of the mountaintop. It's very simple. It's very understandable. It has a clear emotional hook for us. We need to deliver our wife's ashes to the top of the mountaintop. It was her last wish. That's very emotionally powerful. And in the process of doing that, we come across many roadblocks that prevent us doing that. And it really is the driving force that pulls us through the story. So that's kind of like, if you want to get a better sense of understanding the concept, like that's one I think is really powerful and really clear, just so you get a sense of what I'm talking about. So at the start of the playthrough, we have two really clear and understandable yearnings pulling us through the story. One, finding a cure for the feathering, and two, finding out what happened to our sister, and of course seeing if it's possible to resurrect her, if we did resurrect her, etc. I'd mentioned this at the beginning of the video, so I just want to like quick reminder now, this video that you're watching right now is not an analysis or the critique of the story. If you guys are interested, I would love to say that for a later video. I can make that into a later video. But the one thing I do want to say about the story is that I want to praise how simple it is to follow. Is having a strong and easy to understand narrative indicative of a good ARPG? No. Absolutely not. I think this is pretty safe to say, but From Software games, they are the reason that we have the term Soulslike. They are considered the pinnacle of ARPGs for many people. I think, again, it's safe to say, are sort of notorious for not having very easy to understand narratives. They are all incredibly lore-rich stories, and certain narratives are a bit easier to follow. So please don't write in the comments, I am not suggesting that there is not a story there or there is not lore there. There is probably more lore in From Software games than like any other video game than I can think to mention, okay? So that's not what I'm saying. But I think it is safe to say that sometimes a narrative isn't easy to follow, but they're amazing games. So it's absolutely not a must-have. Something I actually really love about Lies of P that differed from Dark Souls and Elden Ring is that it had a much clearer narrative structure to follow. So when it came time to making decisions in the game, I clearly understood the impact it would have on my character, the world, and how it drove my character closer to or further away from their yearning. Whilst I probably play ARPGs the most, I don't exclusively play them. I'm drawn to RPGs, open world games, action adventure games. I'm honestly typically drawn to games that do have a really strong narrative structure. So for me personally, it's a major draw that Wuchang seems to follow in that suit and does have a narrative that's clear and understandable to follow. Something else that I wanted to call out and praise, but I realize there's probably no better place to mention it in this video, is how they handle NPC quest progressions. Wuchang's version of the Dark Souls Bonfire, Elden Ring's Site of Grace, and Lies of P Stargazer are shrines. From the shrine, you'll be able to heal, access your storage, level up. We'll talk about the leveling up system later. Socket buffs to your weapon, and of course, to fast travel. When you're able to advance an NPC's quest or have a questline unfinished in an area, there will be a grayscale portrait of the NPC next to the location name they're at. I don't think they're the first game to do this. I feel like I've seen this before and I'm just completely blanking on the name. If you know, again, feel free to put it down in the comments, but I honestly love this system. I know there's something really compelling and different about how From Software handles NPC progressions. It's one of the things that I actually also really loved about when I played Elden Ring. Elden Ring was my first FromSoft game. Since then, I've played Dark Souls 1, Bloodborne, most of Sekiro, and Dark Souls 3. And there is something that I really do love about the fact that it's not immediately obvious how you progress stories. It encourages you to just continue to explore, continue to talk to people. And there is something very bold about how From Software handles story progression, where it says like, hey, they kind of go, if you mess up this NPC quest line, we are not precious about that, right? And instead it's like, if you want to get that NPC questline right to just play through the game, there's something I sincerely do really love about that. But I don't think I'd want every game to be that way. So I do like how Wuchang handles the NPC quest lines. I think also because the storyline, the narrative structure for Wuchang is much clearer than the narrative structure for a game like Elden Ring. I actually do really enjoy that the NPC quests are much easier to follow. And I think they found a really happy middle ground where it's not like they have a journal and mission markers like you would get in like more like larger sort of like RPG games or something. I do like that it's not too handholdy, but it makes it obvious enough like, hey, you need to go back and check in on these people. Okay, we've given you basics about the game. We've given you basics about the story. You've heard my thoughts about it. Let's get into the point that I think most people are excited about, the gameplay loop. Let's start with the basics. As Wuchang, you have a proficiency with 5 different weapon classes: axes, dual blades, one-handed swords, spears, and long swords. The sword you initially start with is a longsword, but you quickly gain access to other weapon types. Small caveat, not only was I given early access to the game, I was also given the DLC to the game. The DLC for this game, it's a bunch of armor classes and a bunch of weapon classes. So I actually had access to weapons from each weapon class much earlier on in the game. So I was experimenting with all of the weapon types, again, much earlier on. But as I was playing through, I noticed that you do find at least one of each weapon class fairly early on in the game. So you won't be locked into like having to use your basic starter longsword for too long. Assuming that you're doing like some exploring around and whatnot, you should find weapons for each weapon class pretty early on. The only weapon type I think I didn't really experiment around with, I think I swung it maybe a handful of times, was the axe. Just as a bit of a backstory, when it comes to playing these kinds of games, I love a fast moving, I'm much more of like a dex build. I love dual-handed, like dual-wielded weapons. So I always prioritize fast movement, high DPS in terms of like how quickly you can attack. So I very, 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 very rarely will ever use a heavy weapon type unless I absolutely have to. I was expecting the heaviness for the axe to be much greater than it is. You do still feel a slight hindrance in your movement, like you do still feel like you're wielding something heavy, but it's definitely not like your slow strength build in a FromSoft game, for example. It's not that. Your entire gameplay loop revolves around charging Skyborn Might. If there's one thing that you take away from this video, it should be, or I hope that it is, the importance of charging and gaining Skyborn Might in every piece of combat that you do. You need Skyborn Might to do anything that essentially isn't a light or heavy attack. So to use your spells or your weapon abilities, you need to spend your Skyborn Might points. There is no mana flask in this game or separate mana bar. It's all tied to the Skyborn Might system. You gain Skyborn Might by performing perfect dodges, called shimmering in this game. You can also unlock certain skills in the skill tree via the leveling system, don't worry, we'll get there, that allows for additional ways to earn Skyborn Might. What this gameplay loop allows for or encourages from our players is to play very aggressively and to have like a high risk, high reward kind of gameplay style. This will not be your slow and steady using a heavy weapon and a shield. That's not what this game is about. I don't even think you can pick up a shield in this game. I did not run across a shield. There is no shield class within your leveling system. I feel 99.9% positive you will not get access to a shield. I mentioned this already, but whenever I play ARPGs, I'm always drawn to your sort of glass cannon builds, very quick movement. So this kind of gameplay style that encourages and rewards aggression, tactical aggression, right? I'm really, really drawn to. I say tactical aggression because I also want to point out I got access, like I said, to so many different armor types. I started off with a bunch of armor types in the DLC. You collect armor very, very easily throughout the game. The armor is all also gorgeous. Gorgeous. We'll get into it more later. Whilst you do collect a variety of armors and some of them have different defensive stats, you really do take damage very easily. In my 10 hours of gameplay, never came across an armor type that was like, oh, this is really heavy and bulky and really greatly mitigates damage coming in. So I would expect that no matter what you do in the game, or no matter how much you set up your build, you will always be taking significant damage. I think at most you could survive like 3 hits. I think very often I was dying to 2 hits. So again, it very much cements in the player's mind, this is about being tactically aggressive. You have to make sure you're doing the perfect dodges. And by doing the perfect dodges, you of course gain Skyborn Might. And with Skyborn Might, you're then able to use spells and your weapons abilities. And it all continues to feed into one another. But very, very, very much to get into the habit of mitigating damage you're taking in by doing the perfect dodges. It'll be interesting to see how others approach the combat, but based purely on my experience playing the game, I don't see how it's possible to play it without being aggressive, to be honest. But, I mean, we see people doing challenge runs of games all the time and beating them in ways that we didn't expect. So I wouldn't be surprised if someone finds a way to complete the game without doing a perfect dodge, but I'll be surprised. Let's just say that. You can and are encouraged to carry 2 weapons with you at all times. Starting out, you have an entire ability that allows you to spend Skyborn Might to do a powerful attack that then swaps you to your secondary weapon. The last major tool in your toolkit are spells. You collect these either by finding them in the overworld or by defeating certain bosses. You don't need an additional item like a staff to use these spells. And again, the currency you need to spend to use spells is Skyborn Might. So the perfect gameplay loop for Wuchang is to remain aggressive, perfect dodge to charge up Skyborn Might, and use a combination of melee attacks and spells to take down your enemies. The final game mechanic that impacts your combat is the Maddening system. As a result of your affliction, Wuchang will start to build up madness. If your madness reaches 100%, you will receive a simultaneous buff and debuff. Your attack power will increase, but the damage you take will also increase. This is like the glass cannon state. When you reach this state, you have 2 options to reduce your madness. You can either use a particular item at specific locations to remove the madness, or you can spar off against an alternate version of yourself, and upon defeating her, your madness will reset. This copy of yourself will be using the same weapon class as you're using and is expectedly just as lethal as you are. Defeating this copy of you will not only remove your madness, but also gives you some additional items as a reward. I sincerely love this mechanic, as the fights that I had each time felt unique. Again, I think because I was changing out my weapon class, it then also meant that I was fighting a copy of me that was using the same weapon class as I was using at the time, which I think led to each of the fights feeling a bit fresh and different. Even though she has your build, she's not a straight mimic of you, so they really do feel unique each time in that sense as well. Remember when I said earlier on in the video to remember when I talk about the mysterious woman that hands you the sword? Again, I'm only about 10 hours into my gameplay, so I don't have like full confirmation of this, but my theory, and I think it's a fairly safe theory, is that the woman who hands you your sword at the start of the game is this copy of you that you spar off against when you need to reduce your madness. My other theory is also that this character will have much larger story implications beyond just being a way for you to get your starting weapon and a way for you to reduce your madness. I sort of suspect that there will be more at play than just that. I don't know yet. Obviously, please don't spoil in the comments if you do know, but that is my running theory. Even though I just said there's 2 ways to get rid of madness, it's not entirely true. Your madness builds up each time you die in combat, but it also increases each time you kill human enemies in game. Conversely, each time you defeat feathered enemies in game, your madness decreases. I wasn't able to get a good gauge of like how much killing each human enemy increases your madness, and conversely, how much killing each feathered enemy decreases your madness. My feeling at this stage in playing is that once your madness reaches 100%, defeating feathered enemies doesn't decrease your madness, but I could be wrong. I've touched on it some already, but let's finally talk about the leveling system, as it does tie in somewhat to the gameplay loop, or I guess kind of massively. You complete all leveling from within the shrine in a section called Impetus Repository. In here, you spend your in-game currency, red mercury. This is the equivalent of like runes in Elden Ring, souls in Dark Souls, etc., to gain red mercury essence. You spend red mercury essence in the skill tree to level up either your weapon skills / proficiency or your elusiveness. The skill tree is interesting as it's a combination of raw leveling up stats like agility and strength, each weapon class scales with one of these stats, and vitality and stamina. But you also spend these points to unlock weapon skills, increase your flasks, increase the health gained from flasks, and increase your spell power. The best part? You can reset your skill tree at any point, all completely for free. This allows you to freely experiment with all weapon types so that you're not locked into one playstyle throughout your playthrough. To level up your weapons, you just level up your mastery in each weapon class. I also love this because it allows for total freedom in not only using a variety of weapon classes, but it also allows you to freely swap out your weapon equipment without being punished. You'll want to do this as not all weapons within a weapon class are created equally. Each will have a unique skill set to them, some of which, at least I found, give you boons in certain boss fights. The one thing I couldn't decide on, and I'd be interested to hear your guys' POV as you play through the game, is if it makes more sense for you to focus on leveling up one weapon tree, and then if you want to swap weapons, to just like continually be resetting your skill points that you can dump them into the other weapon class that you're interested in. If you should be doing that, or if you should kind of be spreading out the leveling maybe between like 2, maybe at most like 3 weapon classes. Of course, I think as you get later on in the game, you get more points. You can probably feel more free to spend them across like other weapon classes. The only reason I believe it's the latter is because of that mechanic I mentioned earlier on, where you have a skill that basically allows you to do a really powerful move and auto swaps you to a different weapon type. My gut says, and of course you can play the game however you want to play. I already mentioned it. Some people are probably going to play the game without even using a sword, like fists only. I have no doubt that that's going to happen at some point. I'm excited to see those runs when they do happen. But my gut says that they do want you to be exploring around with at least like a couple weapon classes at a time. I just don't get the vibe that the intended use of the mechanic is to punch in L3, at least on a controller, is, and I played the whole game on a controller. Sorry, you can play it mouse and keyboard. I played it with a controller. I always play ARPGs with controllers. But anyway, you punch in L3 to do the skill that allows you to do a powerful attack and swap weapons. I don't know. It's just me. I just didn't get the vibe that you're meant to have like 2 longsword swap and be swapping between longswords. Again, you can play the game however you want. I'm just trying to get a sense of what the developers intended. And so I think from at least a period of time that I've been playing in game, the intention is to spread out skills across a couple of weapon trees. But again, let me know your thoughts, especially as you play the game. Last thing to touch on for the gameplay loop are benedictions and tempering. Benedictions are 3 slots each weapon has to hold additional buffs. You will collect certain items that give you additional benefits on your weapons. You slot these within the shrine menu, and if you have one item slotting in one weapon, you can't then slot it in an additional weapon. Think like Materia in Final Fantasy or Lumina in this year's Clair Obscur Expedition 33 if you've played any of those games. Tempering is a mechanic that allows for you to imbue your weapon with different effects. You equip the item onto your item hotbar in order to imbue your weapon with the effect during a fight. You set up which temper to use from within the tempering menu of the shrine. The item you need to equip in the tempering menus are needles, which you slot into acupressure points. These needles you typically acquire from boss fights. Using this mid-fight will imbue your weapon with effects like fire, for example. These can kind of be compared to like the grindstone mechanic in Lies of P, if you played that. This is just a small aside. I know I feel like I've had so many small asides during this video. I'm sorry. It's like not important to the gameplay loop, but just something that I wanted to call out. I honestly actually personally really loved the visual look and feel for the tempering menu, how it's your arm, like your feathered arm, and then you're slotting needles into acupressure points. I feel like it's a really fun and natural integration of like distinct Chinese culture and gives the game a unique cultural flair. Something that's both a blessing and a curse for me is how varied and involved the combat system is. I sincerely love what great variety there is to the combat and how open it all is to the player. Like you're never forced into a certain playstyle or locked out of using both melee and spell casting like you could be, for example, in like a Dark Souls or Elden Ring. But it can be a bit overwhelming at first, remembering all of the terminology and all of the tools within your toolkit. I definitely remember hitting around the 5-hour mark and starting to feel like I was actually getting the hang of using all of the available mechanics, and that really unlocked a new level of fun for me. So just know that if you do feel overwhelmed at first, it really does start to come together, and it's not like you have to wait, 15 hours for it to all suddenly click, or at least I didn't. I feel like I should also caveat quickly. My experience with the FromSoft games is that you really do want to be speccing into one speciality, that if you try to spread yourself too thin across too many stats, you'll be in real trouble. So that's why I almost always stick with melee builds in these games, because I don't ever have enough to spec into like intelligence or faith or what have you, or arcane even. I don't want the takeaway to be that my experience is how everyone experiences it. So just take what I'm saying with a pinch of salt, okay? Okay, so you understand basics of the story and the combat loop. So let's talk about how it all comes together as you actually make your way through the game and fight bosses. Let's start with exploration. This is not an open world game, but exploration is too expansive to just say it's an on-rail style game as well. I'd mentioned earlier that I'm slow when it comes to playing games. Part of that is usually because I'm live streaming and chatting with chat, but it's primarily because I really like to take my time exploring and completing all quests instead of just beelining straight through the main story. Going into this, I expected traversal through the world to be fun, but for it to be very limiting in terms of available paths to explore. I was very wrong. The world and level design is far more interesting than I thought, to the point where even though I felt like I was really taking my time to explore every branching path and backtrack when needed, I still feel like I missed so much. Missing branching paths doesn't just mean missing out on loot, it also means potentially missing out on NPCs to talk to initiate or further their quest lines. Additionally, not only are the levels filled with real-life locations or visuals that you can find in real life, each level is also distinct visually, so it doesn't feel like you're exploring the same area over and over again, and yet all of the levels do feel like they cohesively exist in the same universe. Now, on to the most exciting part, the boss fights. Each of the bosses I encountered at this point of the game all feel incredibly unique in terms of visual design, but also in terms of actual combat experience. There is no difficulty setting in the game, something that anyone who's played Souls games or Soul-likes are very familiar with at this point, but there are many mechanics at your disposal to help with combat if you're struggling. I've already mentioned the benedictions and tempering, but additionally when you die you don't automatically lose all of your red mercury. You have the option to pick up any you dropped like you would have in other Souls games and Souls-likes, and after a certain point in the game, very early on, you are given a whistle you can use. You can use the whistle to summon in a companion to help with fights. However, you can't use the whistle for all boss fights. It's only certain ones, and it will be very obvious when you're able to use the whistle in a certain boss fight, so don't worry. Each boss fight feeling unique also means that your approach to each boss fight should vary. Can you make it through the whole game using your starter sword and not leveling up? I'm absolutely sure you could, and I have no doubt we'll be seeing challenge runs shortly after the game releases. However, the game makes it very clear that you should be adjusting your playstyle based on certain bosses. Normally, I would be really wary of this or potentially turned off by this, as I have a certain style of play that I really enjoy. However, there was never a part of my play session where I felt like changing up my playstyle felt like a chore. I truly believe the real joy in the combat comes from when you are changing things up a lot and using everything in your toolkit. Maybe, again, this is really shameful of me to admit, but whenever I'm playing Souls-like games, I very, very rarely will change up how I approach fights to a certain extent. Like, I love dual-wielded blades, I love a dex build, I will almost always be using a variation of this when I make my way through ARPGs. but I found my enjoying greatly increased when I fully embraced all that was available to me. So like you'll notice this in the start of my playthrough, I do really focus on the dual blades, but once I kind of accepted and tried to be using other weapons, I found that my enjoyment of the combat actually greatly increased, which maybe I should be doing in other ARPGs, like mental note for me moving forward, I guess. When you get to the point where you're shimmering effectively, you're using your weapon skills, you're swapping between the weapons, it all comes together and you sort of feel like you're entering a dance-like state that makes you feel powerful but also keeps things pretty fresh. The last thing I want to mention or like expend more time on, and I'm frankly shocked that I've only mentioned it once in this video, and I'm saying it now because I'm not sure where else it best fits in this entire video, but the armor sets in the game are gorgeous. They are stunning. Again, I started with the DLC, so I started with a handful of unique armor sets available to me, but you also pick up many throughout the world, or you can buy them from merchants. Even within just my first 10 hours of gameplay, I stumbled across a wide variety of armor styles, and all of them genuinely felt pretty in their own way. Of course, I had my favorites and my favorite look and feel versus others, but there was no armor set where I looked at it and I said, like, that's truly ugly. Each armor set does also have unique perks, so there will be benefits to wearing certain pieces for certain fights versus others. It'll be interesting to hear your guys' thoughts as you carry on throughout the game. Whilst I did notice that changing out my armor for certain fights definitely had certain perks to it, I don't know if it was like this massive make or break thing where I would say like, look, if you are not changing out your armor, you're going to be having a tough time. I don't think it's to that level, but I would say if you are struggling with certain boss fights, they're afflicting you with certain ailments and you're struggling some, definitely equip an armor set that helps you against that ailment. And look, that's the case for like most Souls-like or most ARPGs. So I'm not telling you anything new, but I do think it's slightly helpful to just hear. I'm always fashion over function for ARPGs, so the wide variety of armor sets is a huge boon for me. It's a huge selling point. Like, frankly, there were many reasons I was so excited for Wuchang to come out, but one of the things that was undeniably a pull for me were all the great armor pieces. We love serving a look in a game. What can I say? I think that about wraps it up for this video. Of course, if you have any specific questions, please write them down in the comments. I will do my absolute best to make sure that I'm answering any questions that you have. Also, I will be uploading my entire gameplay from early access. Again, it's about like 8 to 10 hours of footage, like depending. I've lightly edited bits and pieces out. I'll be uploading those in the coming days, so if you want to see my playthrough, I hope I get to see you in those videos, in those comment sections, and that you'll watch. Whilst those parts are releasing, I will actually be away in China, which is crazy to say. I know I'd kind of mentioned it at the beginning of the video. I'll be coming back to my gameplay when I come back to New York in like early mid-August, so I hope I get to see you in live streams. You'll obviously know exactly where I left off and where I'll be picking up when I come back. And yeah, I sincerely hope I get to see you in those live streams and I get to hear your thoughts and opinions about the game as you've been playing along. Spoiler free though, of course. Again, I want to say a huge thank you to 505 Games and to Bilibili for giving me early access of the game. I'm so excited, over the moon, appreciative, all of the above. So thank you both so much for giving me a chance to play it, especially because I'm leaving whilst the game is out, and most importantly for me to be able to share some of my thoughts and experiences with you guys, and hopefully, look, I've helped you either as you're making your way through the game, if you're stuck on things or you wanted a little prep before. I hope that this helped, and if you're on the fence about whether or not you want to get Wuchang, I hope that this video helped you decide which way you fall, whichever way that ends up being. I'm hoping that this information was helpful to you so that you are having the best experience that you can be. Okay, that's gonna about do it. Thank you, lovely people.